The crack of her hand against my cheek still echoes in my skull. Give me the keys. You don't need them anymore. Elena screamed, her face inches from mine. For a heartbeat, I didn't move. I tasted iron blood blooming at the corner of my mouth, and the sharp sting spread across my skin. The chandelier above us swayed, casting fractured light across her contorted expression. The room seemed to shrink, the walls bending inward until all that existed was her raised hand and my trembling breath. I am Clara Muller, 67 years old. For decades, I have made my living as a translator of ancient texts, Latin prayers scrawled on parchment, Greek tragedies preserved in crumbling volumes. I've spent nights bent over manuscripts that smelled of dust and time, pulling meaning out of silence. But nothing in those centuries-old words prepared me for the violence of my own blood turning against me. Elena, my voice cracked, thin as a reed in the wind. I reached for the table behind me, steadying myself on the polished wood. My fingers brushed against one of my dictionaries, the worn leather cover cool beneath my palm. It had been my companion through years of solitude, yet in that moment it felt like a useless shield. She didn't wait for me to recover. Her hand shot toward my pocket, clawing for the keyring that jangled faintly with each desperate tug. These belong to Daniel and me now. Stop clinging to what isn't yours. Her words rang louder than the slap. Not yours. My own house, the place where I had raised her husband, my only son, was suddenly being stripped from me, syllable by syllable. I tried to answer, but my throat closed. My breath rattled, shallow, as if the very air had been stolen too. All I could hear was the pounding of my heartbeat, syncing with the slow tick of the clock in the hallway. A grotesque rhythm, tick pulse, tick panic. In the silence that followed her outbursts, my mind spun back unwillingly to the countless nights I had spent in front of candlelight, translating lines no one else cared to read. Ancient laments of betrayal, stories of sons who turned from their parents, wives who destroyed households with ambition. I had always thought them distant, preserved safely on yellowed pages. Now, those tragedies were unfolding in my living room, with my own family reciting the lines. Say something, Elena snapped, shoving me once more. Or are you too weak even for that? Her words pierced sharper than her slap. Weak. For years, I had been strong working, saving, paying Daniel's tuition, covering every emergency. I had translated entire tomes alone when others abandoned the work as impossible. And yet, here I stood trembling like a frail leaf. I wanted to cry out that this was my home, that I had built it stone by stone from my sacrifices. But the words, my life's profession, failed me. My tongue, trained to render Cicero and Sophocles into living speech, lay heavy and useless. Elena's eyes glinted with something colder than greed. She pulled back, clutching the keys she had snatched. You'll see, Clara. Daniel agrees. This house is ours now. You're just lingering. Her footsteps echoed down the hall, fading into the slam of the front door. The vibration shivered through the floorboards, rattling the glass cabinets where my books and papers sat in ordered silence. I sank into the nearest chair, my cheeks still burning. My reflection wavered in the glass of the cabinet door. An old woman, blood at her lip, eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in my life, I did not recognize the person staring back. I had spent my career bridging centuries, translating voices long dead so they might be heard again. But what translation could capture this? This moment when the living betrayed you more cruelly than any forgotten text. I pressed the back of my hand to my cheek, feeling the swell rise beneath my skin. My body ached, but the deeper wound was invisible. It was the fracture that split me from my own family. I whispered into the empty room, though no one remained to hear it. I have translated texts 2,000 years old, yet I cannot understand how those closest to me turned me into a stranger. The leather-bound dictionary rests on my lap, its spine cracked from decades of use. My fingertips trace the faded gold letters on the cover, and with that touch, the past opens like a door I cannot close. I see myself 35 years ago, hunched over a long oak desk in the university library in Vienna. The windows rattled in the winter wind, and the smell of dust and ink was my constant companion. I was not a wealthy woman, nor a famous one, but I was determined. While others saw dead languages, I saw lifelines, bridges between centuries. Latin and Greek became both my passion and my survival. The salary was modest. On paper, it seemed laughable, barely enough for rent and bread. Yet somehow, with careful saving and endless side projects, I managed not only to live, but to raise my son, Daniel. Every month I wired him 7,200 during his years of study. I can still picture the receipts stacked in my drawer, each one a quiet vow. Your future will not suffer as mine did. There were nights I translated until dawn, my eyes burning from candlelight. Once, when Daniel was 12, I collapsed at the desk, waking with ink smudged across my cheek. He laughed and pressed a sticky note to my forehead. "Don't forget to sleep, Mama." I kept that note for years, tucked inside my dictionary. I thought it proof of love. By the time Daniel finished university, I had scraped together $50,000 money I could have spent on traveling or repairing my aging apartment or even just resting. Instead, I placed it in his hands for the down payment on his first flat. His eyes had glistened with gratitude, and for a moment, I believed every sacrifice had been worth it. Still, my life was one of trade-offs. I patched the same winter coat for 15 years. I walked instead of taking trams. When friends invited me to dinner, I smiled and said I had too much work, hiding the truth that I couldn't afford the luxury. Each compromise I justified with the same phrase, "Daniel will have more." Looking back now, I wonder if I confused sacrifice with love. Did I believe that giving everything would guarantee loyalty in return, or was I simply afraid to keep anything for myself? The dictionaries became both a symbol and a prison, heavy, thick, smelling of old leather. They traveled with me through every move, every new library, every translation project. At first, I clung to them with pride, proof that my work mattered. Later, I clutched them out of fear, as if losing them meant losing my identity. I remember one particular scene as clearly as if it were yesterday. Daniel, 17, walked into my study late at night. He watched me bent over my manuscripts, surrounded by towering stacks of books. "Why do you keep doing this?" he asked. "For you," I answered without looking up. "So you'll never have to struggle the way I did." He shrugged, half amused, half indifferent. "But you look miserable, Mama." I laughed then, dismissing the sting in his words. But deep down, I wondered, did he already see my sacrifices not as gifts, but as burdens? There were signs, of course, but I ignored them. Small things, a sigh when I asked him to call, a flash of irritation when I reminded him about bills. I told myself it was youth, stress, the usual distance between mother and grown child. Yet sometimes, when Elena joined our dinners after they married, I felt a shift in the air. She would glance at my worn-out coat, at the stacks of dictionaries cluttering the shelves, and smirk as if they were relics. "You still keep all these?" she once asked, tapping the cover of my Latin lexicon. "They are my life's work," I said quietly. She smiled thinly. "Or just heavy baggage." I should have heard the warning in her tone. I should have seen the way Daniel stayed silent, letting her words hang. But I silenced my doubts with the same old refrain, "They are family. They won't hurt me." And so I worked harder, gave more, tightened my belt another notch. Each euro I saved, I imagined as a brick in the home Daniel would one day build. Each page I translated was a thread woven into the tapestry of his life. But what tapestry was I left with? Piles of notes, aching hands, fading eyesight. And the dictionaries, always the dictionaries growing heavier each year as if mocking me. Even now, holding one against my chest, I cannot escape the bitter irony. I had spent decades decoding voices long dead, giving them life again. Yet when my own voice trembled for recognition, it was drowned out by the people I loved most. I pressed the dictionary closed and whisper into the silence. I had poured my entire life into ancient pages, only to be erased from the story of my own family. I was 30 years old, and my world was a single wooden desk that wobbled every time I leaned too hard on it. The lamp above flickered, casting shadows across stacks of parchment and dictionaries. My hands smelled of ink. My eyes burned from reading faded lines of Greek verse. Outside, Vienna slept beneath its cathedral bells. But inside my apartment, the only rhythm was the scratch of my pen and the slow tick of an old wall clock. Money was scarce then. Rent devoured most of my salary, and I often chose black bread and tea instead of supper. Still, I told myself it was enough, as long as Daniel had everything he needed. He was 8, full of restless questions, always scribbling on scraps of paper as if words themselves were toys. One night, long past midnight, I felt a small pair of arms wrap around my shoulders. "Mama, you're still working?" His voice was thick with sleep. I turned, startled, and found him standing barefoot in his pajamas, hair mussed. He had dragged his blanket behind him like a cape. "I have to finish this translation," I whispered, pressing a finger to my lips. "Go back to bed, darling." But he shook his head and climbed onto my lap, warm and heavy against me. He looked at the towers of books with wide eyes. "When I grow up," he said solemnly, "I'll buy you a castle, the biggest one in the city. You can fill it with all your books and never have to work so hard." I laughed, though tears pricked my eyes. "A castle? That sounds like a fairy tale." "It's a promise," he insisted, resting his head against my chest. His little hand reached for the dictionary lying open on the desk and patted it clumsily, as if blessing it. That moment etched itself into me. The image of a dream house, a castle of books, a fortress of love took root in my heart. Whenever exhaustion threatened to break me, I recalled his sleepy vow. It became my fuel, my consolation. There were other small gestures, too. Once, for my birthday, Daniel crafted a paper crown from his school notebook. He placed it on my head, grinning. "Now you're the queen of languages." I still remember how flimsy it felt. The pencil scribbles bleeding through the folds, and yet I wore it the entire evening, pretending I was royalty in a palace of words. I told myself these signs of affection meant my sacrifices were seen, even if unspoken. Each hour I traded for money, each meal I skipped, each wrinkle that carved itself into my skin, all of it would one day be repaid not in riches but in love. But memory is cruel. What once shimmered with hope now tastes bitter. The castle he promised never came. Instead, the house I built with sacrifice became a battlefield, the very walls echoing with accusations and demands. Who would have thought that the dream castle would turn into the prison of my old age? The moment of collapse did not come with a scream, but with silence. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the thin strip of paper from the bank, another automatic transfer to Daniel's account. Numbers draining from my life into his, like blood through an open vein. The kettle hissed on the stove, steam curling into the air, but I felt no warmth. It was such an ordinary morning. The smell of burnt toast, the ticking clock on the wall, the faint hum of traffic outside. And yet, inside me, something snapped. I realized I was living in a house that no longer felt like mine, fueling a life that erased me. I pressed my hands flat on the table, my skin pale against the wood. My heart hammered. A thought rose, cold and sharp. If I continue, I will vanish. I whispered aloud, my own voice startling me. No more. The questions came like blows. How much longer can I feed those who see me as nothing? When did my love turn into their entitlement? If I have given everything, what is left for me? Do I still exist? Or am I only a purse with a heartbeat? Each question echoed in my skull, each one cutting deeper. For the first time, I was not afraid of the answers. I was afraid of silence, of what would happen if I never asked again. My hands trembled as I opened my laptop. The banking page glowed on the screen. I scrolled through the stand-in orders, those silent, obedient transactions that had carried my money away month after month. My cursor hovered over the cancel button. My breath came shallow, fast. Click. One transfer canceled. Click. Another gone. Click. The last one erased. The sound was so small, but in my chest it roared like thunder. My shoulders sagged, a weight lifted, and yet beneath the relief, fear lingered. I knew what this meant. Daniel would rage. Elena would sneer. They would call me selfish, cruel, insane. They would try to twist my resolve until it snapped. But if I didn't stop here, right now, I would lose more than money. I would lose myself. I stood and walked to the front door. The keys felt heavy in my palm. My own keys, the ones Elena had tried to snatch from me. My throat tightened as I slid the old lock out of its place, the metal scraping in protest. I fitted the new lock, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the screws. Each twist of the screwdriver was a prayer, each bead of sweat on my forehead a confession. When the mechanism finally clicked into place, I leaned my forehead against the door and exhaled. The click of the new lock was not just a sound. It was a sentence, a declaration, a boundary drawn in steel. For years, I had lived as if the price of love was constant surrender. I had bled myself dry to keep peace, to keep family, to keep illusions alive. But peace had turned into silence, family into chains, and illusions into poison. If I didn't change, the cost would be everything. My health, my dignity, the last scraps of my independence. If I did change, I risked confrontation, loneliness, maybe even losing my son forever. But for the first time, I understood losing him was not the same as losing myself. I straightened, my breathing slowed, my hands no longer shook. The woman who had sat trembling at the kitchen table was gone. In her place stood someone steadier, fiercer. I whispered again, this time with steel in my voice. I exist, and I will not disappear. The click of the lock that day was the first full stop I ever wrote for my own freedom. The house grew quiet, but not with peace. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your chest, making every breath feel like trespass. Daniel no longer called me Mama. Days passed with barely a word from him. He moved through the hall like a stranger renting a room, his steps slow, deliberate, heavy enough to make the floorboards groan. Elena's heels were sharper, clicking like punctuation marks that ended conversations before they began. At dinner, they no longer argued with me. They simply ate in silence, their eyes fixed on their plates, their cutlery scraping like knives across stone. Every now and then, Elena would glance up, her expression unreadable, and then smirk as if she knew something I did not. My phone lit up one evening with a message from her. You will regret this. No greeting, no signature, just those 4 words glowing against the dark screen. My fingers hovered above the reply button, but I had no words to give. I turned the phone face down, heart pounding. Even ordinary sounds carried menace. The slam of a cupboard, the creak of a door, the sudden vibration of my phone on the table, they all made me flinch. I moved through my own home as if trespassing, careful not to provoke the storm I sensed brewing. One night, as I returned from the library, I found the mailbox hanging open. Inside, an envelope with no stamp, no address, just my name scrawled in hurried ink. I tore it open on the doorstep. A single scrap of paper inside. It's not your house anymore. I stood frozen under the dim porch light, the evening wind cutting through my coat. For a long moment, I simply stared at the paper, my hands trembling. I felt watched, though the street was empty. Somewhere above, a shutter banged against the wall, and I nearly dropped the note. I carried it inside, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the pages of my dictionary. Perhaps I thought that by hiding it among ancient words, it would lose its sting. But the threat lingered in the air, silent and poisonous. Every day, the tension thickened. I began to notice the way Daniel avoided my eyes, the way Elena whispered into her phone in the next room, lowering her voice when I passed. Once, I entered the kitchen and conversation ceased instantly, like a candle blown out. The smell of burnt sugar lingered, acrid and bitter, clinging to the air. I told myself not to overreact. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe silence was safer than shouting. But deep down, I knew better. Silence was not safety. It was strategy. They were waiting, gathering, plotting. And so I waited too. Every sound, every shadow became a warning. The calm stretched on like a taut string, quivering, ready to snap. This silence was nothing more than a blank space in a sentence, waiting for the next violent chapter to begin. The house looked the same, but the air had changed. The curtains were drawn, though the afternoon sun still burned behind them. The living room felt dim, overbreathed. On the coffee table, my leather dictionary sat like witnesses, spines cracked, gold letters dulled, watching everything and saying nothing. The scent of overripe pears from the fruit bowl had turned faintly sour. It was my home, and yet the air had been rewritten in a language I did not speak. I was arranging letters at the desk when I heard the front door open without a knock. Daniel's steps were slow, careful, almost ceremonial. Elena's heels clicked behind him, sharp, precise, like periods hammered at the end of each line. I didn't stand right away. I finished aligning the envelopes into a neat, defensible square. Then I turned. Elena was already smiling. "Clara," she said, voice warm enough to pass inspection, "we should talk." Daniel didn't smile. He kept his hands in his coat pockets and stared at the rug as if the pattern might save him. I gestured to the chairs. "Let's keep it short." "Of course," Elena said. She did not sit. Instead, she placed a slim folder on the coffee table right beside my dictionaries, as if staking new territory. She straightened the edges with surgical care. "We're here to help." "To help," Daniel echoed, too quietly, like a student repeating a phrase he didn't understand. "Help me do what?" I asked. Elena's eyes flicked to the new lock on the door and back to my face. "To manage things you shouldn't have to worry about at your age." "I'm 67, I said. "Exactly," she said gently. "You deserve rest." The room tightened. I could feel the draft from the hallway crawling across my ankles, thin as doubt. Elena slid a document from the folder and tapped it with a manicured nail. "We've prepared something simple. It keeps everything safe. For you." I waited. She tilted the page toward me. "A power of attorney. Limited. We would handle the tedious parts, bills, accounts, property maintenance. You focus on your books and your hobbies." "My work," I said. "Of course," she murmured. "Your work." Daniel shifted his weight. The floorboard under his shoe groaned like an old dog. "I've already canceled the transfers," I said. "You know that." Her smile didn't falter. "We do. Which is why this is even more important." "More important for whom?" I asked. "For the family." She laced her fingers, wedding band flashing. "We all know you prefer order. This is order." I glanced at Daniel. He stared at the folder as though it contained a bomb wired to his silence. "Sit," I told him. He sat. Elena remained standing. "Say your piece," I said to her. She inhaled delicately, as if smelling the last of the pears. "You've been emotional." "It's understandable. Change is overwhelming. But there are ways to make this smooth. You sign, we take care of everything. No more stress, no more mistakes." "Mistakes," I repeated. She looked at my hands. "It happens. Passwords, banks, scams. You've heard the stories." "I translate Cicero," I said. "I can manage a password." "Then it will be easy," she said brightly. A formality. Silence pooled between us. I could hear the fridge humming. A faucet somewhere in the building dripped in double time. I thought, absurdly, of a Greek chorus, all those masked faces whispering fate from the wings. "Show me," I said. She slid the paper closer. "Ah, que chung, toi su quant la de ba." "Sign it," she translated sweetly, fingertip resting on the signature line. We'll manage things for you. I didn't touch the document. I traced the edge of my dictionary instead, feeling the cracked leather bite my palm. I'm not a line of text you can erase, I said. A small muscle jumped in her jaw. Daniel's gaze lifted flicker fast, then fell. Elena's voice cooled by a degree. No one is erasing you. We're protecting you. If you refuse, you put yourself at risk. And frankly, she softened the word until it curdled. You put Daniel at risk too. How? I asked. Liability, she said smoothly. Unexpected expenses. The house needs work. Taxes. Imagine something happens and you can't decide. We're only being practical. I leaned back, watching the light die in the room inch by inch. Practical would have been a conversation before you grabbed my keys. Her smile vanished. Daniel cleared his throat. Mama, listen. Elena just wants... What do you want, Daniel? I asked. He swallowed. His eyes were my eyes, only younger and undecided. I want peace. So do I said, but not at the cost of my name. Elena tapped the paper again, more sharply. You're being dramatic. And you're being dishonest, I said. Her eyebrow arched. Dishonest? You left a note in my mailbox, I said. No stamp, no address. It's not your house anymore. She blinked, then laughed. If someone threatened you, you should call the police, Clara. But it wasn't us. Daniel looked startled. What note? Never mind, Elena said quickly. I let the moment sit. I let Daniel hear the seams creak. Elena recovered first. She reached back into the folder and produced a second sheet. If the power of attorney frightens you, and it shouldn't, this is lighter, a co-signature. We help approve larger transactions. You keep the small ones. The small ones, I said. Groceries, utilities, hairdresser. Her smile returned. Freedom. I stood. The room seemed to tilt toward me, the dictionaries, the pears, the curtains all leaning into here. I won't sign. Elena did not blink. Then we'll have to take other steps. Which are, I asked. Legal ones, she said simply. Daniel has rights as your son. We can demonstrate that you're making unsafe decisions, running down assets, changing locks, cutting family support suddenly. It presents a picture. A picture, I said. Judges look at patterns, she went on, voice light, as if discussing weather. They protect vulnerable people from exploitation, sometimes from themselves. Daniel shifted again. Elena. She lifted a hand without looking at him. Let me finish. Then, to me, we don't want to embarrass anyone, but if you force us, we'll do what's necessary. I picked up the folder and weighed it. How light malice felt on paper. I held it as I would a book, searching for a spine, a plot, a moral argument. There was none. Only signature lines and the scent of toner. Why this? I asked softly. Why now? Elena's eyes flicked to the new lock again. You made unilateral changes. After you hit me, I said. Her lips stretched into a smile that did not reach her eyes. Clara, please. No one will believe that. I set the folder down. The dictionaries glowered beside it, ancient and stubborn. Leave, I said. Elena didn't move. Sign, and we leave with gratitude. No, I said. She turned to Daniel, voice gentle. Talk to her. He looked at me, then at the papers. Mama, I don't want to fight. Just make it easier. For whom? I asked again. For all of us, he said. For me. I felt something catch in my chest, an old thread snapping. I fed you when I couldn't feed myself, I said quietly. I walked instead of riding. I patched my coat. I gave you 50,000 euros with hands that shook. If I sign this, I vanish from my life to make room for yours. Elena's expression sharpened. The softness peeled away. You're selfish, she said. You hoard. You cling. You don't even use the space you have. What do you need this house for? Dust and dead books. My books are alive, I said. They speak better than you do. She laughed once, short and hard. This is going nowhere. She reached for the pen in her bag, uncapped it with a pop, and thrust it toward me over the table, close enough that the tip hovered above the signature line. Last chance. I did not take it. I placed my palm flat over the signature space, covering my name. Elena leaned in. Our faces were inches apart. I could smell sugar on her breath, glossy and stale. We're trying to save you from yourself. I don't need salvation, I said. I need respect. She withdrew the pen and slid the papers back into the folder with a swift sweep that nicked the edge of a dictionary. A tiny curl of leather lifted where the cover had been abraded. I ran my fingertip over the wound, smoothing it down like a bandage. The room felt colder. The curtain shivered as if something had passed through. Elena straightened and adjusted her sleeve. You leave us no choice. Daniel stood too slowly, like a man waking into a nightmare. Elena, maybe we should? We will, she said, already turning toward the door. We'll handle it properly. Handle what? He asked, helpless. She's unwell, Elena said, not bothering to lower her voice. She's making erratic decisions. We'll file. We'll get the authority to manage things the right way. The words hung where they were spoken, like hooks. Go, I said. Elena paused at the threshold and looked back. For a heartbeat, the performance slipped, and I saw something raw and avid underneath. You think your stubbornness is strength, she said. It's just decay. Daniel hesitated, eyes flickering between us. Mama, I faced him, steady. If loving me means erasing me, don't love me like that. He opened his mouth. No words came. He followed her out. The new lock clicked behind them with my sound, not theirs. I stood very still until the hum of the fridge returned to a normal, domestic tone. The pears on the table grew sweeter by contrast, as if threatened fruit ripened to outpace its own bruise. I gathered the dictionaries into a stack, aligning their edges, restoring some private order to the room. Then I noticed the folder. It had been left behind in their haste, empty, or so I thought. A single sheet had slipped from the sleeve and lodged under the table leg. I crouched and drew it out. It wasn't another power of attorney. It was an unsigned declaration of concern, a form letter with blank spaces left for names, dates, examples. A script for how to portray me. Confused, impulsive, vulnerable to persuasion. In the margins, in Elena's tidy hand, notes. Lock change sickenum impulsive. Transfers canceled. Unstable. Record voicemail. Another line, underlined twice. Door camera, disable. I stared at the ink until the words blurred. Then I set the paper down and smoothed it flat with both palms. I was not surprised. Forewarned does not mean unhurt. A car door slammed outside. Voices drifted up, indistinct. I imagined Elena describing the scene to someone who would listen with the right kind of sympathy. I imagined Daniel lagging. The first blow didn't arrive with shouting. It arrived folded. A courier slid a thick envelope through my mail slot at 9:12 a.m., Tuesday, stamped with a glossy law firm crest that looked like a medal pinned to a lie. I set my tea down and stared at my name on the front, Clara Mill-Lear, typed in a font colder than metal. Inside, a letter alleging impaired capacity, attached to a draft power of attorney appointing Daniel as my financial guardian. My eyes skimmed the paragraphs. The words marched like soldiers. Imprudent transfers, risk of self-neglect, urgent need for protective oversight. I felt the room tilt. I flipped to the last page and stopped breathing. There, above my printed name, was my signature. It was almost perfect. Almost. They had gotten the sweep of the C correct, but my M has always slanted slightly to the right on the second stroke, a tiny defiance learned in school. And here the second stroke lay dead straight. A mimicry without pulse. A note clipped to the file. Please be advised your son and daughter-in-law have expressed concerns for your well-being. Well-being. I laughed once, a sound that broke into a cough. I called the firm. A man with a pearly voice answered. This is Ms. Muller, I said, steady as I could. That signature is not mine. We understand your distress, he replied, butter melting over knives. Our clients are concerned with your financial vulnerability. Your clients, I repeated, are my family. Precisely, he said, as if that settled everything. When I hung up, my hands shook so hard the kettle rattled against the stove. I pressed my palms to the cool countertop and waited for the tremor to pass. It didn't. I opened drawers, looking for something, anything, to anchor me. Receipts, bank statements, my call log from the past month, the small, the dated, the verifiable. By 10:03 a.m., I began my list, ink biting into paper. Doorcam, timestamps Fry 21, 14, Sat 1827, Sun 19, Suo 2, Elena at my door, alone, no permission. Bank transfers, standing orders canceled Monday 07, 41, confirmation emails filed, pharmacy receipt 15 Sept 16, 52, my name spelled correctly, signature pad record on file, library entrance log, university ID swipes, 1319 Sept, nightly 18, 0021,003. I am present, alert, working. I was building a timeline, not of their story, but of mine. At noon, a second knock. Not a courier, Elena. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked in the way you claim a seat at a table someone else set. She lifted a brow at the envelope on the counter. So you got it. This is a forgery, I said, voice flat. She shrugged. You've been making erratic decisions. Daniel just wants to make sure you're safe. Safe. The word tasted like rust. By stealing my signature? She leaned against the fridge, all soft smile and sharpened eyes. You're overreacting, Clara. If you sign a proper version today, we can avoid any unpleasantness. Courts are tedious and public. I thought of the neighbors, the whispers, the weight of shame. I'm not signing anything. She let the silence bloom, then cut it. Then we'll proceed. After she left, I found the trash bag under the sink torn, papers wedged at the bottom. I pulled them free. Drafts, photocopies. On one, my name had been traced in pencil, the pressure so heavy it dented the page below. My throat burned. In the margins, a note in Elena's quick, slanted hand. Practice again, smooth the M. I folded the page and slid it between the leather covers of my dictionary. Among the dead languages, here was a live wound. News travels faster than truth. By evening, a neighbor texted, heard you've been having episodes? Are you okay? Episodes. Are you okay? I stood at the window and watched the courtyard lamps blink on one by one. I wondered which mouth had given birth to those words. I wondered why, after all these years of translating the precise meaning of objects and oaths, my own meaning could be rewritten so easily by strangers. At 7:45 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I nearly ignored it. Clara? It's Bernard. Bernard. A name from a quieter decade. He'd been a friend of my late husband, now a lawyer with a reputation for patience where others preferred performance. Elena and Daniel have retained Satcher and Roth, I said. A small exhale. I assumed as much when I saw the letterhead. I didn't sign anything. I believe you, he said simply, as if those 3 words were a warm coat. May I come by tomorrow morning? Bring tea. We'll talk. That night, I slept in fragments. The refrigerator hummed like a distant engine. In my dream, my name kept sliding off pages and crashing to the floor. Bernard arrived at 9:00 a.m. with jasmine tea and a briefcase scarred by decades of other people's battles. He listened as I laid everything out. The courier, the forged signature, the note from the trash, the doorcam timestamps. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he opened his case and set a small digital recorder on the table. Let's preserve everything, he said. We build a record they can't reshape. We started with the doorcam. He asked me to scroll to Friday 21:14. There she was, Elena, face half lit, trying my handle, whispering into her phone. She'll cave, she always does. Bernard tapped the screen. Save. Duplicate. Offsite backup. His voice was crisp, clean. We cataloged emails, texts, bank confirmations, the pharmacy signature pad. He dictated each item with date and time, the way a surgeon names instruments. When we reached the forged draft, he studied the signature beneath the magnifying glass he'd brought. See this, he said, pointing at the second stroke of the M, the straight line. And the pressure distribution, your pen lifts slightly here, there's drags. I stared, relief rising like a tide. He wasn't just looking, he was seeing. Will it be enough? I asked. We will need more, he said. But this is a start. After he left, I took a walk to breathe air that wasn't heavy with legalese. Mrs. Novak, the elderly neighbor who kept roses by the stairwell, was pruning in a sweater 2 sizes too big. I heard noises yesterday, she said, not unkindly. Are you all right, dear? I could have shrugged her off. Instead, I held her gaze. My family is trying to take my home. She pursed her lips. I have ears and a pen. She nodded to my door cam. If you need a statement, I saw that girl shove you last week. I pretended I didn't, because shame is a heavy coat. But I can write it down now. For a second, the hallway steadied under my feet. Thank you, I whispered. Truly. The next day, the law firm fired its first proper volley. A formal petition for temporary guardianship, stamped 1432. In it, they stated I had recently exhibited confusion and placed myself at risk. They included a list of witnesses, 2 neighbors I barely knew, and a cashier from a store where Elena liked to shop. I read their statements. She seemed disoriented. She forgot her wallet. I remembered the day. My hands were full of groceries Elena had insisted on paying after snatching my bag. The cashier had only seen my empty hands. Bernard called that evening. They're moving quickly, he said. We move cleaner. What does that mean? It means we don't mimic their noise. We sharpen the signal, so we sharpened. I visited my GP, who documented my cognitive exam clear. We requested library logs confirming my consistent research hours. We obtained pharmacy records, signatures, dates, the steadiness of my hand across time. Bernard drafted a statement that read like a spine. No fluff, only vertebrae facts in sequence. Along the way, small kindnesses appeared like lamps in fog. Anya, the young librarian with hair dyed a brave, improbable blue, slid a folder to me across the counter. Your log printouts. And my aunt went through something similar. If you need to sit where the cameras catch your table, take row C, seat 4, highest resolution. I smiled. Thank you. And Mrs. Pye. And Ms. Muller, she added, awkward but earnest. Your notes on Euripides, they helped me. You matter here. At home, the tension returned. Daniel's silence deepened. Elena's smile thinned. They didn't mention the petition. They didn't need to. It moved like a weather front through the rooms, felt, not seen. When I opened the fridge, the milk had been moved to a higher shelf, just out of easy reach, as if my hands had aged 10 extra years overnight. On the hallway mirror, someone had wiped away my fingerprints with exaggerated cleanliness, leaving a smear that distorted my face when I passed. Bernard kept a rhythm: collect, corroborate, copy. He found a handwriting analyst willing to compare my signatures over 15 years. Bank forms 2008, passport renewal 2013, university contract 2019, pharmacy pad Sept 15. The report was careful, conservative, and clear. Significant indicators of forgery on the POA draft. News rumors grew fatter. I was unstable, forgetful, paranoid. I saw a mother from the next building tug her child away when I approached the gate. Shame, old and obedient, tried to bow my head. I refused it. I walked straighter. If they would make a spectacle, let them see a spine. Still, fear stalked me in the quieter hours. What if the court believed them? What if the world decided my truth was a misunderstanding and theirs was concern? I woke at 3006 a.m. night after night to the same thought. They are not just taking my home, they are taking my name. On Friday, 18,027, the door cam recorded Elena again. She pressed the bell and, when I didn't answer, leaned close to the lens. Sign the proper papers, she whispered, or this will get ugly. I pressed my back to the door and breathed. When she left, I saved the clip, labeled it Threat 1827, and sent it to Bernard. Saturday brought a small respite. Mrs. Novak invited me for tea. Her kitchen smelled of cinnamon and courage. I wrote the statement, she said, handing me a page in careful cursive. Date, time, everything I saw. I am old, but I am not invisible. We drank in silence, a decent human quiet, the kind that fills, not flattens. Sunday, the storm line inched closer. A notice arrived, preliminary hearing date set. I read it twice, then set it beside my dictionary. The leather looked especially dark that afternoon, like night stitched into an object. I stroked the spine. Once those books had been my fortress. Now, they were my archive proof that I had been here, working, reading, knowing. That evening, Bernard called. We'll file our response tomorrow, he said. Door cam footage, handwriting analysis, medical letter, library logs, neighbor statement, and, Clara, your own sworn declaration, your voice. That matters. I swallowed. I'm ready. Good, he said, because this is your story, not theirs. After we hung up, I sat at the table with a fresh page. The city hummed beyond my windows. In the corner, the trash bag rustled, some trick of air. And for a second, I thought I heard that pencil digging into paper again, their practiced imitation of me. I picked up my pen. My hand hovered, then steadied. I began to write, line by line, the woman I refused to let them erase. Among the forged pages of their manuscript, I found the one true line that belonged to me. But truth alone does not guarantee victory. The hearing was set. Their lies had legs. Rumors were multiplying. I stared at the date on the notice and felt the old fear pad back into the room like a patient animal. When the judge asks whose story this is, mine or theirs, will I be heard, or will I be footnoted out of my own life? The days leading up to the hearing felt like standing in the mouth of a tunnel, the echo of an unseen train rumbling closer. Every object in my apartment seemed transformed into evidence, every scrap of paper a potential shield. Bernard called our meetings strategy sessions, but to me they felt like war councils. My dining table disappeared under neat piles. Bank statements, door cam clips labeled by date, pharmacy receipts, library entry logs, Mrs. Bime, Novak's handwritten witness note, the handwriting analyst's report. Each stack sat like a polished weapon. Information is your armor, Bernard told me, adjusting his glasses. And truth is your blade. I touched the folders one by one, as if feeling the weight of steel. Once, my life had revolved around manuscripts, dictionaries, quiet pages no one else bothered to read. Now, I was translating my own survival into a language courts could understand. Timestamps, signatures, affidavits. At night, I practiced. Bernard had warned me, the other side will try to rattle you. They will twist words. Do not let them. So I stood before the mirror, a folded statement in my hand. The first attempt was pitiful. My voice cracked. My hand shook so hard the paper trembled like a flag in a storm. My name is Clara Muller, I began, but the words collapsed into a whisper. I tried again. My name is Clara Muller. I am 67 years old. I have translated Latin and Greek texts for more than 4 decades. I am not incompetent. I am not confused. I am here because my own family forged my name. The sound startled me. My reflection stared back, cheeks flushed, eyes glistening. I felt both shame and pride. Shame that it took me so long to say it. Pride that I had finally begun. I recorded myself on my phone, listened back. The first versions made me wince. breathless, hesitant, apologetic. But each night I improved. Each night the tremor lessened, the pauses shrank. I learned to slow down, to let silence sit beside me rather than choke me. During the day, I found allies waiting where I least expected. Anya, the young librarian, pressed another folder into my hands. "Printouts of your ID swipe," she said, "and I marked the pages of your translation logs with dates. No one can argue with ink." Mrs. Novak shuffled into my flat carrying a tin of poppy seed cake. "Eat," she commanded, then softer, "Courage needs sugar." She tapped the note she had written, her cursive looping bravely across the page. "I will stand if called." I saw what I saw. Even Mr. Keller, the grocer downstairs, slipped me an old receipt. "That day they said you were confused. You paid exact change." I wrote the time on the back. Each gesture was small, almost trivial, yet together they felt like a choir, their quiet voices forming a shield around me. I was not entirely alone. Still, doubt gnawed at me in the quiet hours. What if I stumbled? What if my words failed again, as they had at the kitchen table when Elena first demanded the keys? I would pace the apartment, whispering lines like prayers. I am capable. I know my life. I did not sign that paper. One evening, exhaustion won. I sank onto the sofa, surrounded by stacks of paper, and closed my eyes. Memory ambushed me, the years of silence, the nights I swallowed anger to keep peace. The times I let Elena's barbs pierce without reply. The countless meals where I laughed off insults, telling myself survival meant quiet. I opened my eyes to the folders. Not this time. Silence had protected no one. I rose, stood before the mirror once more. My reflection looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were clearer. I lifted the statement, inhaled deeply. "My name is Clara Muller," I said, steady now. "I have lived in this house for 20 years. I supported my son through his studies. I gave him $7,200 every month, $50,000 for his first apartment. I am not reckless. I am not senile. I am being erased by people who benefit from my silence. But I will not be erased." The words rang against the glass. For the first time, I did not flinch. I smiled faintly. My voice had grown muscle. The stammer was gone. When Bernard arrived the next morning, I greeted him with tea already steeped. He scanned my notes, then looked up. "You're ready," he said simply. "Not yet," I replied, surprising myself, "but I will be." That evening, I laid the folders carefully into a leather satchel. One by one, like a soldier packing armor, documents, receipts, testimonies, camera clips, my statement on top, I tightened the strap until it bit into my palm. It felt like a sword hilt. I learned to speak the truth as if it were a new language, at first stammering, then whole. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and nerves. Light slanted through tall windows, carving bars across the floor, as if reminding us that freedom was on trial here. Rows of benches creaked beneath murmuring spectators. The air hummed with whispers and suppressed coughs. At the front, the judge sat elevated, robes draped like a curtain none of us could pierce. My palms sweated inside my gloves. I could hear my own pulse louder than the shuffling of papers. I told myself, this is not their dining table, not their kitchen. This is public. This is where truth must breathe. Elena entered with a lawyer sleek as glass. She wore pearls, her smile rehearsed, sweetness painted over steel. Daniel trailed behind her, shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on the floor. He didn't look at me. My heart cracked again, but I forced the fracture shut. "Your Honor," Elena's lawyer began, his voice smooth as buttering a blade, "we are here because Mrs. Enders, Muller, though beloved, has demonstrated financial recklessness and declining mental capacity. My clients seek only to protect her out of love." Love. The word fell like ash. Bernard rose. "We dispute both the facts and the insinuations. My client is lucid, independent, and the victim of forgery. We will show this court evidence, witnesses, and, most damning, my client's own daughter-in-law caught on camera. Gasps rippled through the benches. Elena's smile flickered, then hardened. The questioning began. Elena spoke first, dripping honey. She forgets dates, loses things. Once she left the stove on, we worry about her safety. I gripped my folder. Yes, I had once left the kettle whistling too long. That was not decline, that was exhaustion. Bernard rose. Mrs. Muller, did you cancel financial transfers recently? Yes. My voice trembled, then steadied. I did. Consciously, deliberately. He nodded. And did you sign this power of attorney? He held up the forged draft. No, that is not my signature. The judge leaned forward. We will examine handwriting reports shortly. Elena's lawyer called a cashier as a witness. She said, I remember her looking confused, forgetting her wallet. I wanted to shout, because Elena was holding it. But Bernard calmly produced the receipt Keller had saved. Exact change recorded at the same timestamp. The cashier's cheeks flushed. Strike one. First, medical expertise. Dr. Weiss, my GP, testified. I performed a cognitive exam last month. Mrs. Muller's memory and judgment are intact. She manages medication accurately. His words planted anchors in the drifting sea. Second, practical reality. The locksmith I had hired took the stand. She contacted me, explained the situation clearly, paid, and supervised the installation of a new lock. Every instruction precise. Bernard asked, did she appear confused? The locksmith snorted, more decisive than most. Laughter rippled. Even the judge's mouth twitched. Third, community witness. Mrs. Novak entered, frail but firm, leaning on her cane. She looked at me, then at the court. I saw Elena shove Clara last week, demanding her keys. I said nothing then because shame is heavy, but truth is heavier if left unsaid. Elena shifted, her pearls suddenly too tight around her neck. Strike two. Then came the door cam. The bailiff rolled in a screen. Bernard pressed play. There it was, Elena on my doorstep, voice sharp, hand flashing across my cheek. My head snapped back. She clawed at my pocket, seized the keys, hissed, you don't need them anymore. The courtroom gasped. The judge's eyebrows rose, his gavel hovering as if ready even then. Elena's lawyer objected weakly, but the judge silenced him. The footage is clear. Strike three. Through it all, Daniel said nothing. Not once did his eyes meet mine. When called, he muttered, I think my mother is overwhelmed. Elena only wants to help. His voice was flat, rehearsed, lifeless. My chest ached. My son, my boy who once promised me a castle, now a shadow mouthing lines from someone else's script. I clenched my fists beneath the table. Love had not died, but it had curdled. I wanted to scream, look at me, Daniel. Remember who fed you, clothed you, sacrificed for you, but silence was his answer, and silence hurt worse than any accusation. Finally, the judge turned. Mrs. Muller, you may speak. I rose. My knees quivered, but my spine held. I looked at the rows of strangers, at the judge, at my son who would not see me. My name is Clara Muller. I am 67 years old. I have spent 40 years translating texts that others deemed unreadable. My eyes have carried the voices of the dead into the living world. Yes, I am older. Yes, I tire more easily, but I am not incapable. I have given $2,200 each month for years, $50,000 for a home. I patched my coat, skipped meals, worked through nights so that my son would never feel hunger. That was love, not weakness. And yet, the reward for that love has been to be struck in my own doorway, to see my signature counterfeited, to be called confused by the very people who erased my purse faster than they erased my name. I will not be erased. I will not be rewritten. You may say I am aging, but I am not absent. My mind is sharp, My will is intact, and my right to live freely is not yours to confiscate. They want to reduce me to a footnote, a marginalia in my own life. But I am not a footnote. I am the title of my story. The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Even my trembling hands could not soften them. The judge's face was unreadable as he lifted the forged draft. He tapped it once, twice, then set it aside. This court finds the evidence of incapacity insufficient. The alleged power of attorney is rejected as invalid. All petitions for guardianship are denied. Furthermore, the authenticity of the contested document will be referred for investigation. Then, the sound. Crack. The gavel struck wood. The benches shook. My breath caught. The gavel's strike was the exclamation point of my freedom. For a long moment I sat frozen, the weight of weeks still crushing me. Then, release. My shoulders dropped. Tears welled, not bitter but clean, salt and sun mixed together. Around me, murmurs swelled. Mrs. Novak touched my arm. Bernard offered a small, triumphant nod. Elena's face curdled. Daniel's eyes darted away. Let them. Their silence was no longer my prison. Light streamed through the windows, warm and merciless. It struck my cheek, the same cheek that had once burned from Elena's hand. Now it burned with something else, a beginning. For the first time in months, I breathed without the taste of fear. When the door closed behind me that evening, the silence was almost violent. The courthouse had been filled with voices, lawyers, witnesses, the gavel's crack. Now, all that remained was the hollow thud of my own footsteps crossing the wooden floor. The apartment looked the same, yet not the same. The curtains still sagged, the lamp still leaned, the bookshelves still bowed beneath the weight of my dictionaries. But something had shifted. The walls no longer felt like prison bars. They felt like bare stone after a siege, standing but scarred. I set my satchel on the table and sank into the chair. My body ached, but the ache was strangely sweet, like a bruise that reminds you you've survived. I whispered into the emptiness. I won, but I lost my son. The words cracked the silence, then dissolved into it. I pressed my palm against one of the dictionaries, its leather cool and solid. For decades, these volumes had been my companions. They carried the voices of Cicero, of Sophocles, of nameless monks who copied words by candlelight. But tonight, even they offered no comfort. Their pages could translate empires, rituals, laws, but not the betrayal I had faced. I tried to imagine Daniel's face in the courtroom, the way he avoided my eyes, the flatness in his voice. My chest tightened. I would rather he had shouted at me, cursed me, anything but that silence. Silence is harder to forgive than anger. I made tea, the ritual automatic. Kettle on, leaves in, porcelain cup set gently on its saucer. Steam curled upward, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. I cradled it, hoping for warmth to seep into places deeper than skin. Victory did not taste like triumph. It tasted like bitter leaves steeped too long. I walked to the window. Outside, the street was alive with ordinary things. Children chasing a ball, a man locking his bicycle, neighbors carrying groceries. Life continued, indifferent to my war, my verdict, my broken bond. I opened the window. Cool evening air slipped in, brushing against my cheek, the same cheek once branded by Elena's slap. Now it tingled with something gentler. I closed my eyes and let it rest there. On the sill, I noticed a scrap of paper left from my notes, a list of evidence Bernard had dictated. I picked it up and turned it over. On the back, in faint pencil, Daniel's childish scrawl, "Mama, don't forget to sleep." A note from decades ago, tucked into a dictionary, resurfaced by chance. My throat closed. I sat down, clutching the fragile page, and allowed the tears to fall. They were not the sharp, scalding tears of betrayal. They were slower, saltier, washing away something I hadn't known I was still holding. When they dried, I felt lighter. Not happy, not healed, but lighter. I returned the note to the dictionary, sliding it between pages of Greek tragedy. Somehow it belonged there, among words of sorrow and endurance. Later, I stepped into the small balcony garden. The roses Mrs. Novak had given me leaned toward the fading sun, petals bruised but still open. I touched one gently, careful not to break it. For the first time in weeks, I thought not of survival but of growth. I stayed there until the sky turned violet, until the first stars appeared. Inside, the dictionaries waited. My tea had cooled. The walls were still bare stone. My son was still absent. But in the quiet, I realized something. I had space now, space to breathe, to choose, to begin again. No dictionary in the world could ever translate the distance between my son and me. The first morning in my new apartment was startling in its simplicity. I woke to bird song, not footsteps. No slammed doors, no poisoned silences. Just light drifting through pale curtains, touching the wooden floor where my bare feet rested. I padded into the small kitchen. The counter gleamed with emptiness. No stacks of hostile envelopes, no forged drafts waiting like traps, only a kettle, a mug, a jar of coffee. I poured the hot water slowly, inhaled the rising steam, and lifted the cup. For the first time in years, my hands did not tremble. The cup was light. How strange, I thought, that something so small could feel like a declaration. Once, I had sat at my old table with a phone in my hand, its weight suffocating, each transfer draining me into silence. Now I lifted a cup of coffee, and it felt as if the world itself had shifted from iron to porcelain. I carried it to the balcony. Below me stretched the green of the park, dotted with morning joggers and children chasing kites. The air smelled of cut grass. I opened my journal, just a plain notebook, no Latin, no Greek, no footnotes, and began to write. Not for a client, not for a publisher, not for my son, for me. Each line was clumsy, but mine. My pen moved like a hand learning to dance. I realized I was no longer translating. I was authoring. Selling the old house had not been easy. Each book carried down the stairs felt like hauling a memory. Yet with every emptied shelf, the space grew lighter. I gave away furniture, sold what I could, packed only what mattered. The dictionaries, of course, I kept. But I kept them differently. They were no longer shields I clutched in fear. They were artifacts, chapters of a life I had lived and survived. On the top shelf in my new apartment, they stood not as chains, but as reminders. The keys, too, I kept. The old brass set Elena had once tried to rip from my pocket. I could not throw them away. Instead, I placed them in a small glass jar on my desk. Once they had been the symbols of my captivity, now they were proof of escape. Sometimes, late at night, I touched the cool metal and whispered, "You are mine again." Not the house, not the walls, the choice. I thought often of Daniel, but I did not seek him, not out of cruelty, but clarity. The distance between us was real, carved deeper than courts could mend. To chase him would be to reopen wounds still bleeding. Instead, I wrote him into my journal letters unsent, words unspoken. In those pages, I forgave him, not aloud, but enough for my heart to rest. What I could not forgive, I released. Travel came next. For years, I had dreamed of Florence, of the great library that housed manuscripts untouched for centuries. So I went, alone, with only a suitcase and one worn dictionary tucked inside. The library smelled of parchment and sunlight. I sat at a long oak table, pages of a 15th century text spread before me. Once, I would have been here for others, translating, annotating, preserving. See, this time I simply read. I let the words wash through me like music. No deadlines, no payments, no expectations. I closed the book and leaned back. The frescoed ceiling arched above me, painted sky upon sky. For the first time in decades, I felt not small beneath it, but expansive. I filled my days with little freedoms. Morning walks through piazzas, sketching fountains in the margins of my notebook, sharing bread with strangers who became friends, taking classes in watercolor, though my hands were clumsy with brushes instead of pens. Each act was a reclamation. Each choice whispered, I am mine. One evening in Florence, as the sun bled orange across the Arno, I sat at a cafe terrace with my journal. I wrote one final line for the day, then closed the cover. The waiter, a boy no older than Daniel once was, collected my cup and smiled. Studying, he asked. No, I said, surprising myself with the ease of the answer. Living. I returned home weeks later, carrying not souvenirs but space. My apartment welcomed me like an open page. I placed the dictionary back on its shelf, the keys back in their jar, and the journal on my desk. I sat, uncapped my pen, and began to write, not in Latin, not in Greek, not for anyone else, just for me. I once lived to translate the words of others. Now I write the free language of my own. If you've stayed with me through every page of this story, then you already know more about me than many of those who shared my table for years. You've seen the silence, the slack, the forged signature, the courtroom where my voice finally rose. And you've seen the morning light on a new balcony, coffee in hand, freedom at last. I don't tell you this to invite pity. I tell you this because my years of endurance taught me something I wish I had learned sooner. You can place a full stop whenever you choose. If you have ever felt used, diminished, or erased by those closest to you, remember this: your life is still your sentence to write. You are not obliged to let anyone else hold the pen. I was 67 when I finally said enough. You don't have to wait that long. I'll be honest, speaking out felt impossible at first. My words stuttered, my breath broke, my courage faltered. But truth is like a language. The more you speak it, the stronger it becomes on your tongue. So I'll leave you with one question. If it were you, would you dare to hold on to the keys of your own life? Pause here. Let that question sit with you. And if my story struck a chord, I invite you to share it. Tell your own story in the comments. Add your voice to mine. Someone else may need to read it today. Subscribe, follow, stay connected, because stories like these are not just entertainment. They are lifelines, reminders that none of us are truly alone. I'm grateful you walked this road with me. Every click, every word, every moment you gave this story is a kind of solidarity. My story closes here. But who knows? Perhaps this is the opening line of your own freedom.